Samantha Wall. On the morning of October 21st, 2023, a man walking a friend's dog in Detroit's Lafayette Park neighborhood noticed something on the sidewalk. A woman was lying in the fetal position, barefoot, her skin turned blue. A trail of blood led from her body back through the front door of a townhouse. She had been struck 8 times with a straight-edge instrument, 3 times to the head and 5 times to the neck and back. Her last phone activity had been at 1:35 that morning. The woman was Samantha Wall. Wall was 40 years old, the board president of Isaac Agree Downtown Synagogue, the last remaining synagogue within Detroit city limits. She was a political operative who had served as Deputy District Director for U.S. Representative Alyssa Slotkin and Political Director for Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel's re-election campaign. Mayor Mike Duggan called her one of Detroit's great young leaders. She had founded the Muslim-Jewish Forum of Detroit and was named one of Detroit Jewish News 36 under 36 in 2017. Friends described her as eternally optimistic. She had a Black Lives Matter sign on her front door and, crucially, regularly left that door unlocked. The case immediately sparked fears of an anti-Semitic hate crime, coming just 2 weeks after the October 7th attacks in Israel. Detroit Police Chief James White stated within 48 hours that there was no evidence of anti-Semitic motivation. At 4:20 that morning, a motion detector in Wall's living room had triggered. 2 minutes later, her ADT alarm went idle. The evidence indicated she had been attacked inside her home and stumbled outside before collapsing on the sidewalk. The case took its first turn just 2 weeks after the incident. On November 7th, Wall's ex-boyfriend, Jeffrey Herbstman, who was on a work trip 140 miles away in Kalamazoo, called 911 in hysterical distress. He told the dispatcher, "I'm convinced that I may have murdered my girlfriend, and I don't remember it. I have the motive and the opportunity." He had doubled his dose of a new antidepressant and consumed cannabis. He was arrested, but released days later when phone data confirmed he had been home all night. At trial, he attributed the call to an adverse medication reaction. Investigators identified a different suspect through surveillance footage. Michael Jackson Bolanos, 28, a habitual offender with multiple prior sentences. Cameras showed a figure wearing blue surgical gloves and a mask walking 2 miles from his Cass Corridor apartment to Wall's neighborhood. FBI cell phone data placed him at the scene between 3:50 and 4:20 in the morning. Invisible blood on his jacket and backpack, revealed through luminol testing, was approximately 130 septillion times more likely to be Wall's blood than anyone else's. His search history after the incident included the phrase, "A black light sees what?" and he constantly checked news coverage. In a recorded call from custody, he told his girlfriend not to say anything about washing the jacket. He was arrested on December 10th, 2023. At the 5-week trial in June and July of 2024, 48 prosecution witnesses were called. Jackson Bolanos made the unusual decision to take the stand himself. He told the jury, "I'm a black guy in the middle of the night breaking into cars, and I found myself standing in front of a dead white woman. That doesn't look good at all." He claimed the body felt cold and crusty when he found it, which would be inconsistent with a recently committed act. The defense focused relentlessly on Herbstman's 911 confession, presenting him as a viable alternative suspect. It worked. The jury foreman later confirmed the jury got stuck on Herbstman, and his presence in the narrative created what became fatal reasonable doubt. July 18th, 2024. The jury returned a split decision. Not guilty of premeditated charges, guilty of lying to police, and deadlocked on the remaining counts, including felony charges and home invasion. On August 9th, Judge Margaret Van Houten dismissed the remaining charges on double jeopardy grounds under the 2009 Supreme Court ruling, Yeager v. United States. She called the precedent a poor decision, but said she was bound by it. Jackson Bolanos was sentenced to 18 months to 15 years for lying to police. The judge told him, "If lying was an Olympic sport, you would get the gold medal, sir." Wall's sister Monica responded, "My sister's murderer got away with it." The Wayne County Prosecutor's Office filed an appeal to the Michigan Court of Appeals, with the assistant prosecutor stating readiness to take it all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court if necessary. Jackson Bolanos was housed at G. Robert Cotton Correctional Facility. Earliest release date of June 2025. If the prosecution loses its appeal, the case will officially be considered unsolved. The synagogue renamed its building the Samantha Wall Center for Jewish Detroit in August 2024, ensuring her name would remain at the center of the community she loved. But while Wall's case ended with a man walking free despite the evidence, the next one began with a family desperately trying to reach someone who had simply stopped answering his phone. Devin Hoover. In late April of 2023, a family in Indiana grew increasingly worried. Their brother, a neurosurgeon living in Detroit, had stopped returning calls. He was supposed to be visiting their mother, who was critically ill. When he never arrived, they called 911 and asked for a welfare check. The body was discovered only because Hoover failed to show up at his mother's bedside. When repeated calls went unanswered, his family contacted 911 and requested a welfare check at the Boston Edison home. Officers found blood near the back door, and when they searched the third floor, they discovered his body in an attic crawl space, wrapped in a blood-soaked carpet, face down, wearing only socks. If the family had not called, he might not have been found for days or weeks. Dr. Devin Allen Hoover was 53 years old, a board-certified neurosurgeon at Ascension, Michigan's St. John Hospital, who had been recognized as one of Metro Detroit's top docs by Our Detroit magazine every year since 2008. He was the fourth of 7 children and the only son in an Indiana dairy farming family. He graduated from Indiana University School of Medicine in 1996. He had been painstakingly restoring his historic Boston Edison home room by room, served on the board of the Detroit Opera, hosted intimate concerts for rising opera stars in his living room, and threw an annual Christmas gathering that was a neighborhood institution. Patients described him as the best neurosurgeon in the business, a doctor who personally called them after discharge. He drove a white Range Rover. In a devastating detail, Hoover's mother, Loretta, passed away just 4 days after his body was found. The trip he was supposed to make to Indiana was to see her on her deathbed. She never learned what had happened to her son. On April 22, 2023, Hoover had been shot twice in the back of the head inside his home. There was no forced entry, meaning he knew and admitted whoever did it. After the incident, the person responsible wrapped Hoover's body in the carpet and carried it upstairs to the crawl space. He then took Hoover's phone, wallet, cash, credit cards, 2 designer watches, including a $7,300 Cartier purchased the day before, and his white Range Rover. Starting at 1:50 that afternoon, he siphoned nearly $21,000 from Hoover's accounts via Cash App. He drove to Fairlane Mall to buy jewelry with cash, set a fire in his own backyard, tried to find a chop shop for the Range Rover, and attempted to get rid of the weapon. The man was Desmond Burks, 34, a previously convicted felon who had served nearly 9 years on an arson conviction. He had no legitimate employment and, according to prosecutors, sold pills and charged people for personal services. He and Hoover had been in a secret relationship revealed through approximately 4,000 text messages between them. Burks described himself to police as Hoover's little boyfriend and boy toy. He had asked to move in with Hoover, but Hoover refused. Prosecutors argued that a specific event on the day of the incident triggered lethal jealousy. While out on the street, Burks harmed a second person. On April 17, 2024, in a road rage incident, he struck Retta Saleh, 67, of Dearborn, following a minor collision. Saleh passed away from his injuries on May 11th. This arrest finally enabled police to pursue the Hoover case. The investigation spanned 5 U.S. states and 3 countries, involving 71 officers and over 134 search warrants. At the preliminary hearing, Burks's own mother took the stand and testified against him, identifying her son in surveillance footage by his distinctive limp from a prior injury. Her voice broke on the stand. As she left, Burks called out, "I love you," and was scolded by the judge. On January 21, 2026, day 2 of jury selection, Burks shocked the courtroom by pleading guilty to a lesser charge, avoiding the original charge that carried mandatory life without parole. His own attorney admitted the plea was a surprise to everyone. At sentencing on February 20th, 2026, Hoover's grieving sisters approached Burks and gave him a Bible, an act of grace that stunned the courtroom. He smirked. He then told the court, "I'm not a murderer, I'm not a killer. Just because I took the plea, don't mean I did it." He smiled, waved, and threw peace signs at cameras on his way out. Judge Paul Cusick responded, "Quite frankly, you are a murderer, sir." Burks was sentenced to 35 to 60 years for the Hoover case, plus 10 to 15 years concurrent for the passing of Saleh. He will be eligible for parole at approximately age 72. But while Burks hid a body in an attic, the next case involved a man who hid an entire second life, one that included a secret identity, a hidden location, and a plan that unraveled in the most spectacular way imaginable. Jane Bashara. On the morning of January 25, 2012, a tow truck driver in a rundown Detroit alley noticed a Mercedes-Benz SUV that looked out of place. Inside, he found the body of a woman in the back seat. She had been strangled. Her name was Jane Bashara. Jane Bashara, born Jane Engelbrecht, was 56 years old. She was a senior marketing manager at Kima Services, held an MBA from the University of Detroit Mercy, and was the president of the Grosse Pointe South High School Mothers Club. She and her husband Bob had been married 26 years. She was the primary earner in the household, bringing in 4 times Bob's income, with approximately $800,000 in her retirement account. By all outward appearances, they were a model Grosse Pointe couple. Robert Bashara, 54, was the son of a Michigan appellate court judge. He was a Rotary Club president, a church usher, a charity fundraiser, and a community event organizer. But behind all of it, he had been leading a secret second life under the name Master Bob in Detroit's underground community. He maintained a hidden space in the basement of the Hard Luck Lounge, a bar on Mack Avenue near the Detroit Grosse Pointe Park border. A woman named Lady Gianna confirmed it contained whipping stations, spanking stations, bondage stations. Another woman, Lydia Porter, testified she lived in a small room there for 3 years and attended church with Jane and Bob every Sunday. Bob's primary girlfriend, Rachel Gillett, a Wayne State University secretary, believed she was in a committed, exclusive relationship with him. He gave her a diamond ring in 2010 and told her he was planning to leave Jane. They were set to close on a house together, just 3 days after Jane was found, where they planned to live openly. Jane was standing in the way of the life Bob wanted, and she controlled the money. She was the primary earner, bringing in 4 times his income, with $800,000 in her retirement account. Bob needed her gone. To carry out the plan, Bob recruited Joseph Gentz, a developmentally disabled handyman with an IQ of 67, offering him between $2,000 and $10,000, a used Cadillac, and a ring. On January 24th, when Jane arrived home, Gentz was waiting. According to his testimony, Bob was present and told him to proceed. Gentz later told investigators, "I did it. I broke her neck." They then placed Jane's body in her SUV, and Gentz drove it to the alley while Bob established an alibi at the Hard Luck Lounge. 1 week later, the entire plan fell apart. Gentz walked into the Grosse Pointe Park police station and confessed to what he had done, telling investigators that Bob had been the one who organized it. Bob failed a polygraph. Once investigators began looking into his personal life, his double identity exploded across local and national headlines. A community associate named Patrick Webb testified at trial that Bob had once said, "Sometimes I think it'd be cheaper to kill the bitch." Then the most extraordinary detail. In June 2012, Bob attempted to have Gentz eliminated in custody. He approached furniture store owner Steve Tabaudo and asked him to find someone willing to do it for $20,000. Tabaudo contacted authorities and wore a wire for the FBI. Recorded conversations captured Bob discussing the arrangement in detail. He gave $2,000 as a down payment and asked for a receipt. He also patted Tabaudo down for a wire, to which Tabaudo replied, "It's against my religion to wear a wire." Bob Bashara's trial in October 2014 featured 74 witnesses and 460 exhibits. On December 18th, the jury found him guilty on all 5 counts. Judge Vonda Evans sentenced him to life without parole, telling him, "You lived in 2 worlds, light, your family, community, and friends, and darkness where your lies were your truth, and your truth was a lie. I have no mercy for you." Bob Bashara passed away in prison on August 17th, 2020, at age 62. Jane's sister, Julie Rowe, said, "I am disappointed he only spent 8 years in prison." Gentz remains incarcerated with an earliest release date of February 22nd, 2029. The Hard Luck Lounge that housed Bob's secret space later burned to the ground and was rebuilt as a restaurant. But while Bashara's case ended with a conviction, the next one left behind a question that has haunted Detroit for over a decade, one that still has no answer. Alicia Fox, Kayla Hunter, and Christian Justice. Over the Memorial Day weekend of 2014, a family in Detroit began to worry. A young mother named Alicia Fox had stopped answering her phone. She had recently married a man named Aaron Maurice Justice, but the marriage had been troubled almost from the start and lasted only about 4 months. She had asked for a divorce because of his infidelity. Her aunt later said, "She was trying to escape." It was the kind of statement that only makes sense in hindsight. Alicia Marie Fox was 27 years old, a Detroit mother with 2 children, Kayla Hunter and Christian Justice. Her husband had a long history of offenses against women and prior arrests on multiple charges. According to accomplice Timothy Jones, who later testified, Justice and Alicia were arguing. She was trying to leave, and he told Jones he blacked out, and when he came to, he was shooting. Alicia was struck 6 times. What happened next showed how far Justice went to conceal what he had done. He placed Alicia's body in a crawl space and cleaned the entire home with bleach from top to bottom. Then he moved her remains to a vacant house 6 miles away, wrapping her head in a garbage bag and attempting to remove her legs. He sold her car to a junkyard for cash. He rented a U-Haul truck that logged 300 unexplained miles without ever leaving the Detroit metropolitan area. He dumped Alicia's personal belongings in a church donation bin. Then he booked a flight and left for Atlanta. The family found Alicia themselves on June 9, 2014, in the basement of the abandoned house. Her aunt described the moment. "My uncle lifts the door up and her body's in the tarp. It looked as if he tried to cut her legs off, but I could tell it was her because she had a favorite pair of purple basketball shorts." But here's the detail that makes this case unlike any other on this list. Kayla and Christian have never been found, not a trace. Not a single item belonging to either of them. No clothes, no shoes, no toys, no furniture, no car seats was ever recovered anywhere. While everything Alicia owned was accounted for, her children's belongings vanished completely along with them. Timothy Jones testified under oath that the children were alive when he last saw them. The 300 miles logged on the U-Haul truck remain the critical unanswered question in this case. Where did it go for 300 miles without leaving the metro area? What was it carrying? And where did it stop? No Amber Alert was ever issued for the children. Detroit Police Chief James Craig explained at the time that the mother had appeared to have packed up and left, so there was no initial reason to believe the children were in danger. The family was devastated by the lack of urgency. By the time investigators understood what had happened, justice was already in Atlanta. Justice was brought back to Detroit and accepted a plea deal to a lesser charge. Controversially, prosecutors did not require him to reveal the children's whereabouts as part of the agreement, a decision that angered the family and drew criticism from advocates. He was sentenced to 47 to 82 years on September 22, 2015. He sat emotionless throughout the hearing and said nothing about the children, not a word. Prosecutor Tricia Gerard noted, "The irony that this defendant's last name is Justice has never escaped me once." Accomplice Timothy Jones received 2 to 5 years and has since been released. The search for Kayla and Christian remains an active FBI and Detroit police investigation. The family holds on to hope because not a single belonging was found. If they were gone, why would everything they owned disappear too? But while that case left behind questions with no answers, the next one involved a man whose public identity could not have been further from the truth. Kelly Stowe. On December 7, 2018, at approximately 6 in the morning, police in Detroit responded to a call and found a woman lying on the street near East McNichols and Brush. She had sustained a single wound from a .40 caliber firearm beneath her left arm. Her name was Kelly Stowe. Kelly Stowe, 36, born Tristan Stowe and known in the ballroom scene as Kiana Mattel, was a black transgender woman, a Detroit native, and an aspiring fashion designer. Standing 6 feet 4 inches tall, she had attended college in South Dakota on a football scholarship before pursuing fashion studies in Chicago, where she came out as transgender. She returned to Detroit and became active in the ballroom community as a member of the House of Ebony, where she was known for mentoring younger individuals in the LGBTQ community. She was open about the risks she faced. In a tragically prophetic 2015 interview with The Guardian about the dangers facing trans women in Detroit's Palmer Park neighborhood, Stowe said, "The police are unaware with our struggles, so they have no sympathy for us." 3 years later, she was gone in that same neighborhood. The interview had been a warning. Nobody listened. The man responsible was Albert Weathers, 46. By day, he worked as a security guard at the Great Lakes Water Authority and served as pastor of Logos Baptist Church in Detroit, where he had been a member for 20 years. He was a married father. But according to prosecution witnesses, he was also a regular presence in the Palmer Park area at night. Sex worker Kira Butts testified at the hearing that Weathers was a regular client who routinely sought encounters in the area and was known for not paying. After the incident that morning, Weathers got into his car, drove across town to the Great Lakes Water Authority, and clocked in for his regular shift as though nothing had happened. About an hour into his workday, he called police to report what he described as a robbery attempt, stating, "I may have hit the individual." He then added, "It appeared to be a female, but when the voice came through, it was a male." Notably misgendering Stowe in his own report to the dispatcher. The case was investigated as a hate crime and assigned to the Fair Michigan Justice Project, a specialized unit that prosecutes crimes against LGBTQ individuals. It was a groundbreaking assignment, but what followed was an agonizing wait. The investigation and legal proceedings were delayed for nearly 5 years, primarily due to pandemic-related disruptions that shut down courts across Michigan. For Stowe's family, the years of delay compounded a grief that was already unbearable. At sentencing, Stowe's mother addressed Weathers directly. "You murdered my child to try and hide your shame and fear of who you really are." Her grandmother added, "Clearly, he's attracted to that population, so own it." Days before his trial was scheduled to begin, Weathers pleaded guilty on July 27, 2023, to second-degree charges and a firearm offense. He was sentenced on September 8, 2023, to 8 years plus 2 consecutive years for the weapon. The case was a landmark prosecution for the Fair Michigan Justice Project, which maintains a 100% conviction rate across more than 30 cases involving LGBTQ victims. Weathers would be eligible for release around 2033. If you've made it this far and enjoy deep dives into the most shocking criminal cases, hit that subscribe button and don't forget to press the bell icon. But while Weathers took a life and received 10 years, the next case involved a man who had just won millions and took a life over $1,000. Greg McNichol. On the evening of May 7, 2011, the day before Mother's Day, a barbecue was underway at a small apartment building on Beneteau Street on Detroit's east side. The man hosting it was the building's owner, a former Australian rules football player who had moved to America and bought the entire complex for less than $50,000. He was doing the renovations himself, roofing, plumbing, painting, and he had spent months transforming the building. Tenants called him the Crocodile Hunter. His name was Greg McNichol. Gregory McNichol was 45 years old, originally from Victoria, Australia. He had once played for Hawthorn's under-19 squad in Australian rules football, a talented athlete with a promising future in the sport. He served 7 years as a mechanic in the Royal Australian Air Force before making the decision to move to the United States around 1999. He became a construction project manager overseeing major developments, including the $500 million Inn of the Mountain Gods Casino in New Mexico. In February 2011, he purchased the 10-unit apartment complex at 4110 Beneteau Street for less than $50,000, moving into one of the empty units to personally oversee the renovations. He worked with his own hands every day. He evicted squatters and cleared out the dealers who had been using vacant units. He befriended the remaining tenants, who grew fond of his accent and his work ethic. They called him the Crocodile Hunter. Prosecutor Kim Worthy said, "By all accounts, he was a landlord hoping to have a positive impact in the community." That evening, McNichol found himself in a heated argument with one of his tenants, Ayanna Young, and her associates over approximately $1,000 in unpaid rent. The confrontation escalated. Someone reportedly said, "Call Daddy." Moments later, a black Chevrolet Avalanche pulled up to the building. The man who stepped out was Freddie Young, 62, Ayanna's father. He was a 13-year employee of the U.S. Postal Service who had been living an ordinary working-class life until 3 months earlier. On February 4, 2011, his workplace lottery club had held one of 2 winning tickets in the $46.5 million Mega Millions jackpot. Young's share after taxes came to approximately $1.57 million. In the span of a single drawing, he went from a postal worker to a millionaire. And now he had driven to his daughter's apartment building, stepped out of his truck, and was standing in the middle of a confrontation over $1,000 in back rent. He had more money in the vehicle behind him than most people in that neighborhood would earn in a decade. Tenant Leola Brown witnessed what happened next. She testified, "The man said, 'Watch your mouth.' Greg said he wanted them out of my house. Then he shot him. A single round struck McNicol in the groin, likely severing his femoral artery. He tried to walk, collapsed on the sidewalk, and bled out before help could arrive. When police searched Young's truck, they found $150,000 in cash and $500,000 in money orders from his lottery winnings sitting on the seats. Lead investigator Lieutenant Dwayne Blackman said, "It didn't make any sense. I guess he just let his anger take over." Young confessed during questioning but claimed he did not realize he was holding the weapon at the time. The jury did not believe him. He was convicted of second-degree charges and sentenced to approximately 25 to 30 years. His conviction was upheld on appeal in April 2014. Now approximately 76 years old, Young remains incarcerated with an earliest release date around 2032. He had $1.57 million in his truck. The rent dispute was for $1,000. In a final postscript, the apartment building that McNicol had lovingly renovated with his own hands was destroyed by a massive fire on February 24th, 2015. Everything he built, gone. But while McNicol's case turned on a senseless argument, the next one began with someone simply looking for help in the middle of the night. Renisha McBride. In the early hours of November 2nd, 2013, a young woman appeared on the front porch of a home in Dearborn Heights, a mostly white suburb bordering Detroit. She was disoriented, had blood on her hand from an injury, and appeared not to know where she was. A neighbor who had encountered her earlier that night described her as discombobulated and not knowing where she was. She had been involved in a car accident on Detroit's west side hours before, crashing into a parked vehicle, and had walked away from the scene before EMS arrived. Her blood alcohol level was later measured at 0.218%, nearly 3 times the legal limit, with marijuana also in her system. Her whereabouts between approximately 1:30 and 4:30 that morning remain entirely unknown to this day. What she was doing, where she walked, and how she ended up on that particular porch in Dearborn Heights has never been determined. Her name was Renisha McBride. She was 19 years old, a recent Southfield High School graduate who had just accepted a job at Ford Motor Company. The man inside the house was Theodore Wafer, 54, a white airport maintenance worker. He later told police he was awakened by what he described as unbelievable pounding on his doors. He retrieved a Mossberg 12-gauge shotgun, opened his front door, and fired through the locked screen door. The blast struck McBride in the face at close range. The Wayne County medical examiner later described her injuries in clinical terms that left no ambiguity about the force involved. Wafer called 911 and said, "I just shot somebody on my front porch with a shotgun banging on my door." He then hung up. In the hours and days that followed, he gave conflicting statements to investigators. First, he claimed self-defense. Then he said the weapon discharged accidentally. Then he said he did not know it was loaded. Each version contradicted the last. The case drew immediate national comparisons to the Trayvon Martin case, both involving unarmed black individuals and white men who claimed they acted in self-defense. The parallels were impossible to ignore, and activists drew them loudly and repeatedly in the days that followed. Wafer was not arrested immediately after the incident. fueling public outrage across the Detroit metropolitan area and beyond. Charges came 13 days later, only after sustained protests, community pressure, and extensive media coverage forced Wayne County prosecutor Kim Worthy's hand. Worthy later said she had simply needed time to review the evidence. But the delay became a story in itself. Defense attorney Cheryl Carpenter would later claim in court that the ghost of Trayvon Martin was present in the courtroom, arguing her client could not receive a fair trial in the charged atmosphere. McBride's name became part of the emerging national movement for racial justice, invoked alongside Michael Brown and Eric Garner as the country grappled with questions about whose lives were treated as threatening simply because of how they looked. The trial in July and August of 2014 turned on a single question. Did Wafer reasonably fear for his life? The prosecution's evidence said no, and it was overwhelming. There was no evidence of forced entry at any door of the house. No fingerprints or palm prints from McBride were found on any surface. Not the front door, not the screen door, not anywhere. She was completely unarmed and had nothing on her that could be mistaken for a weapon or a tool of any kind. Firearms experts testified that the Mossberg shotgun could not fire accidentally. The trigger required a deliberate pull. Wafer had also walked past a working cell phone on his way to the door. He could have called 911. He chose not to. He testified for 2 days, calling it a total reflex reaction. On August 7, 2014, the jury convicted him on all 3 charges: second-degree involuntary manslaughter and a felony firearm count. He was sentenced to 15 to 30 years plus 2 consecutive years for the weapon, giving him an effective minimum of 17 years. McBride's parents filed a $10 million wrongful death lawsuit, which was settled confidentially in June 2015. The case went through extensive appeals. In February 2022, the Michigan Supreme Court unanimously vacated the manslaughter conviction on double jeopardy grounds, ruling a person cannot be convicted of both second-degree and manslaughter for a single act. At resentencing on June 22, 2022, Judge Hathaway imposed the same sentence: 15 to 30 years plus 2 years. Wafer remains incarcerated at Cooper Street facility in Jackson, Michigan, at minimum security. His earliest release date is August 5, 2031. He has served approximately 12 years. But while McBride's case involved one person and one terrible decision, the next one played out on live television, with a camera crew filming the moment everything went wrong. Aiyana Stanley Jones. On May 16, 2010, shortly after midnight, a tactical unit from the Detroit Police Department prepared to execute a raid at a duplex on Lillibridge Street. They were searching for a suspect named Chauncey Owens in connection with a separate case. Owens was believed to be in the upstairs unit. The downstairs unit belonged to a different family entirely. An A&E television crew filming for the First 48 was embedded with the officers that night, recording the entire operation as it unfolded in real time. The show followed homicide detectives in the critical first 48 hours of an investigation, and the Detroit police had agreed to allow the cameras along for the raid. What happened next was captured in part by those cameras, though the footage was never aired publicly. The family later argued that the cameras changed everything about how the officers behaved that night. Officers threw a flashbang device through the front window of the downstairs apartment, the wrong unit entirely. A grandmother, Myrtilla Jones, was on the couch with her granddaughter, who was asleep under a blanket. Within seconds of entering, Officer Joseph Weekly, a 14-year veteran of the department who had previously appeared on A&E's Detroit SWAT, discharged his MP5 submachine gun. The child was struck and was pronounced gone within the hour at the hospital. The suspect they were looking for, Chauncey Owens, was in the upstairs apartment and surrendered without incident. The accounts of what happened inside diverged immediately. Weekly claimed grandmother Myrtilla Jones hit his weapon in a downward motion, causing it to fire. Myrtilla denied touching it. She testified, "As soon as they came in, their guns were just pointing right there, and he pulled the trigger. I seen the light leave out of her eyes, and the blood started gushing out her mouth, and she was dead." At the second trial, Myrtilla's fingerprints were not found on Weekly's weapon. Another officer on the team testified there was no struggle of any kind. Prosecutor Rob Moran stated, "All he had to do was keep his finger off the trigger." He also pointed out that officers failed to notice toys on the front lawn, indicating that young people lived in the downstairs unit. The presence of the television crew became a central issue. The family believed officers were more concerned about how they appeared on camera rather than properly conducting their operation. Attorney Jeffrey Feger argued the crew got the officers excited. The episode was never broadcast. A&E producer Allison Howard was charged with obstruction for lying to prosecutors about the footage and pleaded no contest, receiving probation. Detroit Mayor Dave Bing subsequently banned reality television crews from accompanying police operations. The legal proceedings that followed produced no accountability whatsoever. The first trial in June 2013 ended in a mistrial after jurors deadlocked, unable to reach a unanimous verdict. During the second trial in 2014, the judge dismissed the involuntary manslaughter charge entirely for insufficient evidence, leaving only a misdemeanor reckless discharge. The jury deadlocked again on that remaining count, 7 voting not guilty and 5 voting guilty. On January 28, 2015, all remaining charges were dismissed. Joseph Weekly was never convicted of anything. He was restored to active duty with the Detroit Police Department, was controversially selected as co-chair of the department's Committee on Race and Equality in 2016, and retired in 2019 with his pension and benefits intact. In April 2019, the city of Detroit settled the family's civil lawsuit for $8.25 million, one of the largest settlements in the city's history. Chauncey Owens, the suspect whose presence in the upstairs apartment prompted the raid in the first place, was convicted separately and received life without parole. Ayanna's father, Charles Jones, was convicted for his role in the incident that led to the raid. As prosecutors alleged, he provided the weapon. He was paroled in October 2021. Grandmother Myrtilla Jones became a prominent voice against police misconduct in the years that followed and passed away around 2020. Rapper J. Cole dedicated the music video for Crooked Smile to the family in 2013, ensuring her name reached beyond Detroit. But while that case involved a failure that lasted seconds, the next one involved a failure that stretched across months and years. As a woman begged every authority she could find for protection that never came. Latricia Green Brown. On August 22, 2025, at approximately 9:45 in the morning, a man walked into Henry Ford Hospital in Detroit carrying a handgun. He had been banned from the building, but no one stopped him. He went to a basement office, told the woman working there that he was dropping off some of her belongings, and asked her to step into the hallway to help him with a bill. A verbal confrontation broke out. Then he fired. A co-worker heard the sound and found her in a pool of blood. The man walked out the front door, got into a white Dodge Charger, and drove away. His name was Mario Dwayne Green. The woman he targeted was his ex-wife, Latricia Green Brown. Latricia Denise Green Brown was 40 years old. She had been an employee of Henry Ford Hospital for 20 years. Working as a scheduler in the nursing department, she had celebrated her 40th birthday just 5 months earlier and had told friends she was going to reclaim her joy. Her mother had passed when she was 13. Her father had also been taken from her. Co-workers described her as an angel who never had an altercation in her life. Latricia had been married to Green from 2012 until their 2018 divorce. But the divorce did not end anything. It changed nothing. Green had a documented history that should have raised every possible alarm. A 2001 conviction for aggravated stalking, a 2006 felony arson conviction for which he served over 3 years in state prison, and 7 personal protection orders filed against him by various individuals over the years. After the divorce, he refused to let go. He called the hospital where Latricia worked approximately 50 times. He showed up uninvited to the building repeatedly despite being banned. He broke into her car. He destroyed her personal belongings. He followed her on the road and tried to run her off it. The pattern was relentless, documented, and escalating. Latricia did everything the system asks a person to do. She filed for a personal protection order, writing in her petition, "I am asking for help before this goes too far, and things are too late." Her first request was denied. A second was granted on July 21st, 2025. But it was never served because Michigan's system places the burden on victims to arrange service, and the process stalled. The paper meant to protect her was sitting in a file somewhere when Green walked into that hospital. After a manhunt involving Detroit police, Michigan State Police, the FBI, and the ATF, Green was arrested at 3 in the morning the following day. He was charged with first-degree premeditated charges, aggravated stalking, and multiple weapons counts. His case was bound over to Wayne County Circuit Court on December 18th, 2025. He remains held without bond and faces life without parole if convicted. The trial has not yet occurred as of February 2026. Latricia's case became a catalyst for legislative change in Michigan. Bipartisan legislation, Senate Bills 611 and 612, was introduced to fundamentally reform the state's protection order system. The bills would require protection orders to be served by law enforcement free of charge and within 72 hours of being granted, removing the burden from victims entirely. The Michigan Senate passed the bills unanimously, 35-0, in December 2025. They now await House action. Latricia asked for help before it was too late. She put it in writing. She used the exact words the system tells you to use. And the system failed to deliver a single piece of paper to the man she was afraid of. It cost her everything. But while Latricia's case showed what happens when the system fails to act, the final case on this list showed what happens when the people who are supposed to save your life declare you gone, and then refuse to believe their own equipment when it says otherwise. Timesha Beauchamp. On August 23, 2020, a mother in Southfield, Michigan, found her daughter unresponsive in the morning and called 911. Her daughter, Timesha Beauchamp, was 20 years old. She had cerebral palsy from birth, was nonverbal, and required 3 breathing treatments every day. Southfield Fire Department paramedics arrived at 7:34 in the morning and attempted resuscitation for approximately 30 minutes before declaring her gone. But that declaration was where the nightmare began, not where it ended. The paramedics, led by Michael Storms, stopped resuscitation 5 to 6 minutes before contacting an emergency room doctor for authorization. When Storms finally called Providence Hospital, he misled the physician about Beauchamp's vital signs. The doctor pronounced her over the phone without ever seeing her in person. Then the family started telling the paramedics something was wrong. They said Beauchamp appeared to still be breathing. They said they could feel a pulse. Storms returned to check. He placed her on a cardiac monitor that showed organized electrical activity, indicating her heart was functioning. Her capnography readings indicated continued respiration. His own equipment was telling him she was alive. He dismissed the readings as reactions to medication. Beauchamp's godmother, who was a registered nurse, examined Beauchamp herself and saw her breathing. She told the paramedics directly and clearly that the woman was alive. She too was dismissed. Then, a funeral home employee from James H. Cole, who came to collect the body, looked at Beauchamp and asked her mother whether she was really gone, pointing out that her chest appeared to be moving. The mother, trusting the paramedics' assessment, repeated the medication explanation she had been given. Nobody listened to any of them. At approximately 11:43 that morning, at the James H. Cole Funeral Home in Detroit, more than 4 hours after the initial 911 call, the embalmer prepared to begin his work. He unzipped the body bag. Beauchamp was gasping for air, her eyes were open, and her chest was rising and falling. She was alive. He called 911 immediately, telling the dispatcher, "I've been doing this like 32 years, and I've never had a situation like this before." Beauchamp was rushed to Sinai Grace Hospital, placed on a ventilator, and transferred to Children's Hospital of Michigan. But the damage had been done. She had been without the oxygen she needed for approximately 4 hours. She had suffered massive brain damage from oxygen deprivation. Medical experts said she would have survived with her existing quality of life if she had been taken to a hospital immediately. Instead, she spent 8 weeks in a coma and passed away on October 18, 2020. Her family's statement read, "This is the second time our beloved Timesha has been pronounced dead. But this time she isn't coming back." The state suspended the licenses of paramedic Storms and his partner Rickard within 3 days of the incident. Investigators who reviewed the case discovered a troubling pattern of failures. Storms had misled the emergency room doctor about Beauchamp's condition. He had dismissed the readings from his own cardiac monitor and capnography equipment when they showed signs of life. And he had altered his written report when uploading it a second time the following day, changing details from what he had originally documented. Yet in December 2020, just 4 months after Beauchamp passed, both paramedics were given a pathway to regain their licenses by passing a national exam. Storms was additionally required to write a paper on protocols for determining when a patient has passed and to submit a 3-page book report. A woman lost her life because of their decisions. The professional consequence was a paper and a book report. The family's $50 million federal civil rights lawsuit was dismissed when the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled in July 2023 that the paramedics had qualified immunity, meaning they could not be held personally liable. A subsequent state lawsuit filed in Oakland County went through multiple dismissals and reinstatements over the following years as the family fought to keep their case alive. Just as a trial date was finally approaching, the city of Southfield settled in December 2025 for $3.25 million. The city's statement read, "We recognize that no resolution can undo the profound tragedy." The family's attorney said, "They are able to close this chapter in their lives, but nothing will ever bring Timesha back." 4 people told the paramedics she was alive. Their own equipment told them she was alive. And still, she ended up in a body bag.